My name is Adam Hoffman. I'm a technical evangelist working for Microsoft. I work out of the Chicago area. I did originally start at Microsoft and did a stint in Redmond. I've been working for Microsoft for about coming up on 5 years now. From 2008 to 2012, I was a dev lead out in Redmond working on Office 365, which of course means if anybody uses Office 365 and has any complaints about that, that you can address them to me because I made all those decisions. This is my blog. I am focused primarily on cloud computing, which for Microsoft means Azure. And this is my blog, stratospheres.es, sort of a hipster domain because I'm not Spanish, but it spelled the words stratospheres. That's my Twitter handle, if you want to follow me. Let me go back to this. So I call this talk Tiny Apps with Big Backends. I've called this talk a lot of things since I've been doing it. I've been doing versions of this talk for about four or 5 months now, based on a particular technology in Windows Azure. I used to call this Using Windows Azure Mobile Services Behind Windows 8 Apps. And when I did that, I would get like maybe 2 people to show up because the word Azure sucks all the air out of a room, apparently, and the word Windows Azure sucks even more out of the room and everything else. And so I've evolved the title, essentially, but this is a very similar talk. So if you actually want to know what we're talking about tonight, what we're going to be talking about tonight is exactly what the title of the talk used to be, Using Windows Azure Mobile Services Behind Win8 Apps. And we'll actually, for the first time, you guys are going to be able to see this, hopefully, if I can remote desktop into a Mac Mini back in Chicago. You'll be able to see a iOS application as well that will attach to the same mobile service it will create, and we'll talk about that. So you'll be able to see that we are a little bit broader than just building Windows 8 applications with it. As a matter of fact, Windows Azure Mobile Services now has open source SDKs that support Windows 8, Windows Phone, iOS, Android, and now a sort of open-ended HTML5/JavaScript version of it. So if you're writing any sort of application and you need any of these services, you should think about Windows Azure Mobile Services as a way to do this. And we'll talk about what it does in a second here. So, if you'd rather not use my hipster.es domain, Adam-Hoffman works. It turns out AdamHoffman.com was taken by a woman for her 7-year-old son, a Chicago realtor, and she's already reserved it for 20 years for her son. So I will never have AdamHoffman.com. It'll be Adam-Hoffman.com for a long time. I just want to make this really quick call out. Today is actually World Autism Awareness Day. I don't know if any of you guys know that. I would ask you to all learn more about autism as it actually affects a lot of people. As it turns out, I'm a father with 2 kids with autism, and that's the only reason I really pay a lot of attention to this. So I'm just going to make that quick shout out there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this. So if you guys want to play along, we offer a 90-day trial to Azure. If any of you guys, well, first off, how many people in here have ever actually played with Azure? Know anything about it? Good, good, good. Okay, yeah, you definitely, because you were telling me that. This is one way to go ahead and get Azure and be able to play along. If you want to do this, you could sign up and even do it right today if you wanted. If you go to aka.ms/Azure 90-day trial, we offer a pretty full-featured trial with enough services to basically run a small instance of a VM in our cloud data centers at about 50% duty cycle. So essentially you need to do your work and then tear it down for the night. You'll get about 15 full days out of it. If you leave it up, it'll essentially run for 15 days and then shut off for the next 15 until the next 30-day cycle comes. That's how the trial runs, is 3 30-day cycles. But you can play along. The other thing you need to do if you want to play along with Azure Mobile Services currently, this is considered a preview feature. We actually have people in production on this. I was supposed to bring a list of those tonight, and it didn't come to me. But we actually have a couple of running production instances right now. We have, I'm not supposed to say the number, but a lot. We have a lot of people who are actually using this service right now. So even though it's a preview feature, what that means is if you actually go to windowsazure.com or sign up for the trial, you actually have to go to the account section and go to the preview features and ask for it, and it basically just enables the menu item so you can see this. So if you take the trial right now, you will not see Azure Mobile Services until you do this. So if you want to play along with this, just remember to do that. And then sign up. What else did I want to say about that? Oh, here's one other thing I do want to say about this. Anybody in here have an MSDN subscription? Access to an MSDN subscription? Okay. So if you have an MSDN subscription, you actually get a pretty significant amount of Azure for free without the trial. And if you're not using that, you're just letting it go to waste. It's sort of a use it or lose it. They don't accrue sort of minutes kind of deal. But the 3 different levels, Professional, Premium, and Ultimate, allow you different levels, essentially, of Azure to play with. But if, let's say, you had Ultimate, for example, that's enough to run 2 small VMs in our data center around the clock. without ever tearing them down. Gets you a 5 gig SQL Azure database for data storage, things like that. Gets you a whole bunch of blob storage, a bunch of work on our Azure Service Bus, which is a pretty cool component, and is a pretty significant benefit of that. If all you have to do is go to your subscriptions page and click on the thing that says get my Windows Azure, and it will enable all that sort of stuff, and then you can play along as well. And you don't have to take the trial, and it just runs for forever. So. Also, Azure extra small VMs run at a 6-to-1 ratio of cost. That is to say, 6 extra small VMs equals 1 small VM. So let's say you had the ultimate subscription. You actually can run 12 extra small VMs, which work great as little web servers, all virtualized behind one load balancer, serving up the same site for free around the clock because of your MSDN subscription. So probably not something you're going to have access to just for free where you work right now. So think about that if you have that. Is that me? Okay. All right. The other thing we're doing right now, I had mentioned that I'm also focused on, I'm primarily focused on cloud stuff, but I'm also focused on Windows 8 stuff. So right now, everybody who's an evangelist at Microsoft is focused on Windows 8 stuff. We're actually trying to build up our app store, much like the iOS App Store and the Android App Store. So we are running a couple of promotions right now. We're actually paying people to create apps at this point. If you want to build apps, we would love to help you do that. You can actually make a little bit of money. You know, it's not a ton of money, but we'll pay you for up to 20 apps, 10 of them in the Windows 8 store, 10 of them in the Windows Phone store. And if you want to do that, you can go and check out this URL and go ahead and do that. And I can talk to you about that afterwards. All right, so here's our agenda. Here's the real meat. I'm going to talk about Windows Azure Mobile Services and essentially what it provides for you. Has anybody in here done any toying with Windows 8 as building apps with it? Okay, 2. All right. Anybody built iOS or any sort of an iOS app? You have, I know that. Okay, cool. Android? Good, okay. So Windows Azure Mobile Services is essentially a component of Windows Azure, our cloud-based stuff, that you can host an OData compliant endpoint wrapped around a SQL Server database in one of our data centers, and you can put up to 10 of those into our data center for free. They're totally no cost for 10 of them right now. And that's not with the trial or anything else. You can have 10 of them, period. In the preview period. On top of that, you will potentially, if you're not using your database out of your trial or your MSDN account, you may pay a few dollars a month essentially for the SQL database behind it. Currently 100 megs of SQL is $5 a month. A gig is $10 a month, and then it goes up per gig from there. But all of that is essentially free if you have MSDN and everything else. And the mobile services itself, which is essentially the RESTful OData compliant endpoint on top of that, plus the ability to do authentication against a variety of data sources and push notifications, is all there for free. So we'll talk about all those things, and I'll show you how you can build them very, very quickly. Okay, so what is Windows Azure Mobile Services? We talked about these 3 components already. Data notifications and authentication. Does all those things. Also, you guys know the difference between authentication and authorization, right? Auth-N versus Auth-Z. Everybody's comfortable with those concepts? Okay. So this is really authentication, although you can very easily roll authorization on top of that, and we'll talk about how you can do that as well. It also has server-side logic. So it turns out that the endpoint we're going to put up tonight for mobile services is actually running JavaScript on the server. It's running Node.js on the server side. So if you guys are comfortable, client guys here, JavaScript people, right? Comfortable? Okay. So it's running that, and you actually have the ability to edit the server-side code as the data transacts in and out of it and write your own business logic on top of it. So you can do things like data validation. You can call out to remote services to butter up your data with additional data, things like that. But you can essentially edit the JavaScript that's running on the server and install server-side logic in there as well. And I'll show you how to do that. Diagnostics, so there's a logging feature so you can figure out what's going on. And then scale. So when you build a mobile service, it will be running one shared web server running the thing on one box. You can essentially decide you want to pay because you want to be able to scale and turn that onto a dedicated box. Take yourself off of a multi-tenant hosted side-by-side with other people's stuff and pay us for the small instances, which currently are about $60 a month, and then turn that up to I believe 3 right now paired up small instances if you want to do that, because you suddenly run into scale, and then you can actually make a call and turn that into more and more if you want to do that. So it will run behind a load balancer, and it can actually scale pretty well. All right, ideal for, we like to say, modern mobile apps. We used to call this Metro apps. You guys may have remembered the term Metro. We don't say that word anymore. We now call them either Windows Store apps or modern mobile apps. I should remember that I'm being recorded right here because my corporate masters will be very excited that I'm still saying the word metro. Reduces the friction associated with repeating common tasks such as user auth, push notifications, structured storage. So when this was first sort of conceptualized, what we were trying to do is really build a service that would allow people who were building apps to very quickly solve really common, simple problems. So let's say you're building an app and suddenly you go, oh, I need to stick data somewhere persistently, right? How am I going to do that? I need data to be pushed up into somewhere that all the different users of my apps and all the different versions of my apps can talk to and get that data back and read and write the data. It turns out for people who are app builders potentially, they may be really, really hardcore engineers like everybody in this room, or they may be some sort of lighter weight people who can write a little bit of code but aren't necessarily server-side gurus. They can't necessarily provision and put up a RESTful endpoint themselves. They're not going to basically do all that sort of server-side coding, but they just want to simply store a couple of name value pairs in a persistent data store. This is designed primarily for those sort of cases. Now, it's important to note that you can do all the craziness you want to do, right? It really is sitting on top of a SQL Server database. It really is a load-balanced set of servers across that, and you can connect with the regular tools you use. SQL Server Management Studio will actually show you how to do that. You can do all sorts of stuff. You can affect the schema yourself. You can do complex queries. You can write all sorts of crazy joins if you want to do that. You can affect the indices. If you're a super hardcore DBA, you can still do all your super hardcore DBAing. But if you're just an app builder who wants to basically put up a table that has first name, last name, city, state, zip, you can do that in about 10 seconds. And so the idea was to make it really, really simple for app builders to do that and not have to make everybody into a hardcore server dev. So we'll talk about that. Rapid development, time is money. Quicker is better. We'll actually put up the first version of an endpoint here in a mobile data service and have a running Windows 8 app talking to it, reading and writing data in about 4 minutes from end to end. We'll do that in a second. And then apps requiring structured data. So SQL database, it really is a SQL database, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay. It's not just for Windows 8. I talked about this. We have open source SDKs. We actually are taking pulls, pull requests and things like that. For Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, iOS, Android, and just recently HTML5. We had originally given out, Windows 8 was the first one, Windows Phone 8 was the second one. The first version of iOS, if you guys had played with that, was a little bit lightweight. It didn't actually support Apple's push notification system. It was sort of supported the data side, but it didn't support all the notification stuff. Now it fully supports the Apple notification services and basically does that integration. So if you guys are building iOS apps, we actually natively hook up to their notification service and can do that as well. I'm going to primarily focus the demos tonight on Windows 8 clients, but if we have time at the end, and I suspect we will, I intend to try to remote into a Mac Mini sitting on a desk back in Chicago and basically take the same application we built in Windows 8 and show you what it looks like as an iOS app and basically read and write the same data just to prove the point. So, all right, let's do it. So, let's see here. Escape that. We're going to go to manage windowsazure.com, which is the Windows Azure portal. All right, I'm looking at my timer. See how fast we can do this. Now, I'll just point this out sort of incidentally. The old version of the Windows Azure portal actually required Silverlight. The new version is all HTML5 JavaScript compliant, so I can run it in Chrome. I can run it. I can write my own wrapper around it. Essentially, we have PowerShell scripts that we've authored to do everything you see happening here. So if you actually want to automate this and not use the portal in your regular build process, you can do that. And we have PowerShell scripts that'll do all that. I'm going to go into mobile services here, which is still showing in preview. I'm going to go ahead and add a new mobile service. Website. Oh, come on. Mobile service. New. And why is it disabled on me right now? Loading did not complete. Let me try to refresh the page. There we go. All right. Okay. So I'm going to create one called your SVNUG, right? Is that right? SVNUG demo.azuremobile.net. Okay. So this is essentially going to put up an endpoint at https svnug.demo.azure-mobile.net, and it's going to be an OData compliant. You can throw OData question mark query equals blah 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 at it. Now, we're going to get to a point where I can either create a new database instance or I can use an existing one. I would recommend to you, to the extent that you can, that you always use an existing one. This is how you will not pay a lot of money, right? So when I've said you get 10 mobile services for free, you pay per Azure or per SQL Azure database for whatever the next level is. So up to 100 megs. Even if you have 100K in the database, you pay the $5 per month for the up to 100 megs. And if you were to create 10 mobile services with 10 separate databases, you would then pay $50 a month for those 10 services in order to have that. What you can do is you can point them all to the same database. And you're thinking, well, what happens if I want to have people in both of them? It's going to separate them by schema. So the name of this thing right here, SVNUG demo, is going to create a schema in the SQL Azure database and put all the tables inside of that. So it's separated by schema so you can reuse the same database and thus maximize essentially the number of applications you can have running in the same database and minimize the amount of money you will potentially pay for your data storage. Okay? So I have one there. I'm going to say use existing here. This is a subscription. Turns out I have a bunch of subscriptions, including a now expired 3-month trial. And I get to pick the data center it goes in. Now, currently, these are the data centers that Mobile Services is deployed in. We have 8 data centers around the world for those who actually pay attention to these things. Azure runs in 4 data centers in the United States, 2 in Europe, and 2 in Asia. This is just where we've deployed Mobile Services. Eventually, Mobile Services will be available in all these data centers, and there may be a reason to do it. Turns out there's a data center in Chicago, which I can't deploy to right now. That would be the closest one. I'm going to go with East for right now. Okay, and so it's going to show me the databases that I have available to me. So I'm going to use this master mobile services demo DB to stick it in, and then we'll look at it with SQL Server Management Studio to see what it actually did. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this, create it, and it's spinning up. Now, what it's doing is essentially provisioning a slot in one of our multi-tenant machines that's dedicated to Azure Mobile Services. It is putting up this OData compliant endpoint. It's setting up a bunch of stuff to let it know that it's called SVNUG demo. It's picking out random crazy keys for access to that, and it's provisioning that now, and it's already ready. So if I actually hit this now and open it in a new window, it should come up and running. Doesn't show you a lot right now, but it is there. There's an endpoint that's ours. DNS has been provisioned. DNS is responding, and it's pointing to that. So let's see what we can actually do with that thing. Well, there's a couple of ways to very quickly see what we can do with it. Let's go into what we give you with SVNUG data. So the first thing we do is we basically take you to this dashboard page. Now, one thing that kind of tripped me up a little bit initially, you can see the tabs here. They don't look so tabby because I don't have the things around them, but those really are the way to navigate through the different parts of this application, right? The dashboard isn't really the dashboard. It turns out this lightning icon is where you land in the beginning. It's sort of like the super dashboard. So when you want to know where that is, make sure you remember the lightning icon because it's even more dashboardy than the dashboard. Okay? It isn't just a pretty picture. It actually is a piece of navigation. I don't know why they did it that way. But anyway, what we do is we show you that the mobile services was created. It's the quick start. And then we allow you to basically choose the platform that you now want to work with. Okay? And we have guidance around all of these things: Windows Store, Windows 8, iOS, Android, HTML. They all look very similar. But within each of these, it allows you to either create a new Windows Store app or a Windows Phone app or iOS app or whatever it is, or connect an existing one. And if you just click on these, it basically gives you the guidance of what you need to do. First off, you'll need, if you're doing any Windows 8 development, you have to have Visual Studio 2012. 2010 doesn't work. 2012 is required. So if you're going to play around with Windows 8 application development, you're going to need VS 2012, and we offer it to you for free. If you, we offer you at least the Express version of it for Windows 8 for free. If you have MSDN, go and get Ultimate because it's so much cooler. But if you don't, you can get it for free. And then the Mobile Services SDK. And the Mobile Services SDK is basically a little SDK that allows the bindings to the tables that we'll use later, the authentication, the other stuff. It's basically just a little SDK you'll want. I already have these on my machine. So I won't do this. The next thing we're going to do is we're basically going to, I guess before I do the demo app here, let me show you the other guidance it could give you. If you had an existing app and you want to connect it, okay? We give you guidance in both C# and JavaScript, not C++. Sorry. And we basically show you, once you have an existing application, how you can point it to your existing mobile service and start working with it. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to generate an out-of-the-box app here, and we're going to create a little to-do list. Okay, so if you want to hook up something else that's already there, we give you the guidance. I'll actually show you this instead. So I'm going to pick C#, Does anybody have a preference for C# versus JavaScript? C#, mostly in the room? Yeah? Okay. Thank you, because I really prefer it too. It works well for me. I was telling some of the people who were in here earlier that 2 weeks ago I did a talk on TypeScript and how it makes me, JavaScript so much more palatable to me. So if you guys haven't played with that, you should do it. So I'm going to open up the zip file. And what has it done? It's created a little thing here. I'm going to extract this to somewhere, little project. Let's put it in generated apps. SVNUG demo. Paste that. All right, let's open it up and take a look around. It created the solution. It created the entire thing. Generates the whole thing. So now this is a demo app. It's a little to-do app. But in the meantime, before we get into here, I'll open the solution. We'll get here. But let's go back to regular tools that you would normally use. Okay. This is SQL Server Management Studio, which probably everybody in the room has used at one point or another in their life to hook up to SQL Server. So it turns out you can connect to SQL Azure that way as well. And it's got a crazy name. I'll try to zoom that up a little bit so you can see it. Got a crazy name, randomly generated gobbledygook.database.windows.net, but that is my SQL Server, my virtual SQL Server in the SQL database, in our data center that allows me to connect to that. Now these three, you'll notice in this Master Mobile Services demo, I was playing with this earlier, I have these multiple schemas and these to-do items in each of these. I'm going to reconnect to this thing. Now that I've actually created another one, I probably need to reconnect because it's been a long time. And then we'll find out that, oh, no, I could. Okay, so I'll go here and I will refresh this. Okay. All right, still what it was. Now let's go back here, right here, and we're going to do this. So when you want to work with a table, you need to create that table. You can either create it in SQL Server Management Studio, or you can essentially create it right here in the portal. I'm going to click this, and it's going to create a table called to-do item in that schema that was just created. There's another way to do this as well that I'll show you in a second. But for the purposes of this, we've created it. If I go back to this, refresh this again, that. Why am I not using my mouse? So much easier. Okay, so now we see that there's the to-do item. I'm going to open this up and look at the columns. When it creates it, initially, it creates just basically an auto number, right? Primary key, big int, can't be null. Nothing else. There's no columns in there right now. But it's essentially the shell of a table that we can put other data in. And again, the idea is to be very simple for app developers who don't want to spend a lot of time in schematization. The other way I can do this as I go on is in the data tab here. You'll see my to-do item, and I can also do a create new table here as well. So once I'm out of this sort of quick starty thing and I want to add table after table after table, I just do it this way. Okay. Going back to here and create. Now that I've done that and I've downloaded and run the app, I'm going to go ahead and show you the app. All right, let's do that. So this is a Windows 8 app. If you haven't actually played with Windows 8 code, initially I'll give you a lightning talk to it right now. There's a couple of things in your solution that are interesting. The first one's going to be this app.xaml. App.xaml is the first thing that runs. You should think of it as your main function entry point is inside of here. And main page is the main page of the application. It essentially gets navigated to, and we'll look at those bits of code in detail here in a second. Let's open up app.xaml. The CS file for it for a second, and I will spin up the font a little bit. Oops. And let's look at the interesting stuff. Okay. So one of the things it does when it sets up is it creates a static mobile service client called mobile service, so I have it available to the rest of the application, and it reaches out to the endpoint that I just created, and it passes through this gobbledygook key. That is the app key that was configured in the database or in the portal. If I go to dashboard, manage keys, it's that application key. Okay, so that's essentially the secret that your application needs to know in order to reach into the mobile service client and do that, right? You can change that, you can regenerate it, then you have to regenerate the app key, obviously, in your code as well. You may, if you want to do that and you want to basically cycle your keys, you'll probably want to have some way that your app can reach out and get a new key when it fails, and some kind of try-catch loop, that sort of thing. But that's how that works. Let's keep looking at the code. So it initially sets up this mobile service and it reaches out and does this. It's going to use this mobile service a lot from here on out. The next thing that's interesting here is the navigate. Let's see here. It's going to try to navigate to the main page, which is basically what it says. Now that I have that, I'm going to open it. Let's go look at the main page code here. Okay, zoom that up a little bit. Now, this has a plain old everyday CLR class called ToDoItem in it. The name of this class is important. It turns out that that class itself needs to match the name of the database table that you're trying to write the data in and out of. And what you'll notice is it has an ID that matches that ID column, but it also has these two other things called text and complete. We're going to build a to-do list that's going to have essentially a text field that's the name of the to-do item, like go get groceries, whatever it is, and complete is basically a bit that says it's done or it's not done, right? So when I create this everyday CLR class, it turns out if I just throw that if I turn it into JSON and throw it at the service will figure out what to do with it. And if the columns don't exist that it needs, it will magically create them for you. It's called dynamic schema. And so you don't need to worry about creating and pre-creating the columns. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. So I'm going to, let's see here. This observable collection is essentially the list in our application. The mobile service table is the reference to the table itself. And what I create is this interface on mobile service table with the type of the class, ToDoItem, the CLR class, and then I just catch a handle to that. Okay? And all it did in order to get it was call that mobile service that we put in the initial static variable, calls get table with that, and it now has a handle to the table in the OData service, right? Okay, so that's an interesting bit in there.
So if it can create the columns on the table on the fly, why wouldn't it just create the table on the fly?
As it turns out, that's a very good question. They decided that dynamic schema was for columns only, but not the table. I suspect they may change that later on, but it is a very good question. It's a very good question. I suspect it has a lot to do with the fact that it has to reach out into the schema based on the name of this, right? There's a lot of proxy that happens here. The name of this class itself tells it what table to look for, but you're right. I mean, in theory, if it's not there, it should be able to probably spin it up on the fly as well. Well, so I'll make this point. I would suggest that dynamic schema is awesome during development time, but you probably want to turn it off, which you can do in the portal afterwards, because you probably don't want somebody figuring out your endpoint, throwing any random JSON at it, and basically just changing your database on you. But yeah, it's a really good point. So we'll get to that, but that is a very fair question, and I suspect that over time that might change. I have no confirmation of that, though. I do want to say this. Anything I say in terms of feature functionality and everything else, especially since I'm on camera, is utter speculation on my point. I will tell you, I will give you my best guess as to where I think things are going based on conversations I have and everything else, but I don't work on the product group. I talk to the product group all the time. I like those guys. I know a lot of guys back in Redmond, but they don't take decisions from me. So I'm happy to relay stuff, but I make no promises. All right, so there's a function here called insert to do item. It's a very simple await call. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of this, but if you do Windows 8 programming in general, you're going to need to get comfortable with the concept of await and async. This is, by the way, the coolest syntactic sugar in the world if you haven't hit this yet, and it's also available on .NET 4.5. But remember all that crazy callback stuff you had to do with async code and spin a second thread and put a callback in place, and when it was done, the semaphore would hit it and all that? Like, this is all you have to do now. If you want to asynchronously spin to another thread and not block the UI thread, you just put the word await in front of it, and you put async on the method, and you're done. And it spins all the rest of that garbage in the background. Awesome. So we'll put a breakpoint here. All right. Yeah, let's just start with that. So I want you to see the app because I've been kind of talking about the app for a while. Let's put a breakpoint there, breakpoint there. All right, let's go ahead and run the app. Let's see what we got to so far. All right, my awesome icon. I spent hours on that. Okay, so this is what it looks like to start with. So it's boring, right? Essentially, the left-hand side lets me type some stuff, and the right-hand side lets me query and update that data. When it spins up, it calls the database, and it puts a list of all the existing to-do items on it. The left-hand side is where I type it in. So let's go ahead and put one in and see what happens. Do demo at SVNUG. Okay. All right, we're going to hit the breakpoint. Now, This gets to the point of the auto schema, but essentially I'm just going to create a new to-do item, and I'm going to set the text property to what just came as the text input. Right, I'll step over that. If I actually inspect it, it's obviously what you expect it to be, right? The ID is by default 0 because I'm not going to set that. It's going to auto number and come back. And then I'm going to call this insert to-do item. Let's step into that. All that does is the await. And it calls this on the to-do item, which I grabbed a handle to earlier. It basically calls this insert async method, and it throws the plain old CLR class at it. That's all it does. Now, magic's going to happen inside there, where it's going to siphon it off. It's going to turn it into JSON. It's going to throw it at the data service, and good stuff will happen there. And then it's going to, once it's done with the insert there, it's going to add it to this to-do item list here, and it's going to show up in the UI. So I'm just going to let it run at this point. Okay. So it's done that. If I go back to here, and I actually now script table is select to new query. I let it run. Am I disconnected? Oh wait, there we go. Hopefully it ran. All right. So that's kind of cool, right? It's now created the record. It's put my text in there, my complete thing. It's altered the schema for me to just get the stuff out there, right? And it's round trip back to me. Very cool. If I rerun the application, it'll read it off. If you think about what I just did, I put up a pretty cool endpoint running OData, right? It throws JSON at it. It changes the schema on the fly so I can really quickly iterate sort of, simple stuff. Now this isn't complicated, right? It's not a crazy complex join between multiple tables and everything else, but for really, really straightforward kind of stuff, pretty fast, pretty cool, right? Let's keep going. All right. If I click on here, I check the checkbox. I grab the to-do item itself as getting the data context itself, so now I have a handle back to that item which was there, right? I've set the ID in my complete flag to true, and I call this update to do. So that will essentially call a very similar function to the insert async. It'll basically take the same handle, it'll call update async, it'll throw the CLR class at it, all the same magic happens, and it basically takes care of it for you, right? So one line of code essentially, and then it's going to pull it off the list of things that we're done. So I'm only going to show things that aren't done, right? Let that happen. What did it do? It wasn't there. As you'd expect, go back here, rerun this. It's just changed. No, yeah, changed the bit of complete to 1, right? Okay, simple, right? Similarly, there's delete async, read async, right? Very, very simple, straightforward stuff. All right? So that's kind of cool. Let's tear this down. Go back to here. And where's my deck? All right. Let's show from current. All right, so that was very, very fast. All right. Let's move forward. So what do we see really quickly? I'm just going to repeat this a bit. Structured storage with a SQL database. If you're using a single database, the apps are partitioned by schema. So you saw that, right? The to-do item existed in multiple schemas. It allows you to reuse the database. That's cool. You can manage the data in the portal. I didn't really spend a lot of time there, but obviously you can do it in SQL Server Management Studio, which I think a lot of us are comfortable with. But I will quickly show you the portal because they like me to do that. If I go to data here and click on the to-do item, it kind of throws up a quick view on that. And it'll page after, I think, 50 records and things like that. So you can sort of just do simple stuff in the portal as well. Let's see, what else? Automatically RESTful API generated for storage. Dynamic schema, I'll show you how to turn that off. So it's cool that you can do this, but you may want to, like I said, at some point turn off that dynamic schema. That's under configure, I believe, and then this enable dynamic schema. So if you want to basically do this in development and then turn it off so that nobody's kind of whacking at you, that's great. Okay.
So it's a master switch for everything, for the whole database?
It is.
It's not per table?
Nope. Nope. It's for the whole system. You turn it on, you turn it off. Oh, you're right. That's exactly right. It's for the service against that schema within the database. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep. So, that's kind of cool. Let's see here. Rich querying capability. So if you're familiar with what an OData endpoint looks like, it turns out there's a rich querying syntax to that question mark. Query equals, column equals this, column equals that. It's basically a SQL where clause-like sort of thing. And you can throw that at it as well. We haven't talked about the ability to author server logic. We'll get to that in a second. But essentially, you can intercept all that CRUD operations that are happening there and write your own stuff. And I'll show you that now real quickly. If I go to data and into the table itself, first off, I'm browsing, but there's this script tab here. And on each of the operations, you'll see little bits of JavaScript that happen, right? So this is, I'll zoom this up a little bit so you guys can see it. That's maybe a little much. That's the insert function. Pretty boring. But I can actually get in here and start typing stuff and change it and save it directly on the server. Now, we can update all this stuff via PowerShell as well. You can have a real build process. Not, you don't have to go all crazy like I am, and I'm just going to start hacking around the code here. But it is important to note that if I change this and do something else, request.execute twice, and want to enter my data twice, for example, if I save this, I'll basically double it up right now. And it goes live right there. So you may want to think about, if you're doing this, like, this is going to make disciplined software developers a little bit crazy, right? Again, the scenario is, quickly sort of get it up and running and everything else. You can script all this stuff. You can put it into a build process. You can, you don't have to do what I'm doing. But I'm showing you all this through the portal to make you understand, essentially, to help you understand what the possibilities are, okay? It does not do IntelliSense yet here, which is a little bit of a bummer. I can also say I'm going to discard before I completely trash it. Yeah, I'm going to make this small enough to read it. Yes, I want to discard the changes. I can do this on insert, update, delete, read, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where I can inject stuff. We'll do that in a minute. All right, so next, what should we do? We should, let's see. I want to make sure I move relatively quickly. All right, so I'm going to take you to essentially pre-built versions, because I don't want you to sit here and stare and watch me type for the purposes of this. Essentially, earlier today, I went ahead and created a couple of versions of this. Step one is essentially what you just saw. It's the blank default, doesn't do a whole lot of thing. The next step here, let's go ahead and close this one, on a different service, is to add authentication to it. So I said we can do authentication. While we're in the portal, let me show you how you actually enable authentication as well. There's this permissions tab. And I can have very fine-grained control on the operations, the CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete on each of the tables, and I can do them differently. So insert, anybody with that application key can do the insert. I can change that to make it wide open. Probably don't want to do that. Only authenticated users, not authorized, but authenticated. So essentially, we'll get to that in a second. Or only scripts and admins. Essentially, you can make that. And there's a different, you noticed when I looked at the keys, there was a script and admin key, which is different than the app key. So you can essentially lock that down. But if I was to now go ahead and open up, let's open up step 2, which adds authentication to it. And let's look at the differences between this and what we just looked at. Let's add authentication. Okay, in the meantime, I'm going to go to that other mobile service, and we're going to lock it down a bit. So let's go to Master Mobile Services 2. Let's go to Data, To-Do Item, To-Do Item, Permissions. Let's change this to only authenticated users, which I've already done. Nice. Okay, so this one's going to be a little bit different. Let's go here, and let's look at what's different about this. In the app.xaml, hopefully I saved this. All right, good. Let's comment out my authenticate. I've added exactly one method and one line of code to this. I've created this mobile services user, where I grab the user that's logged in, authenticated essentially, and I've added this authenticated method. Now let's talk about authentication for a second. Windows Azure Mobile Services supports the concept of authenticating your application through currently 4 different providers. So you can log in with a Windows Live ID, Microsoft ID, Hotmail, Outlook, whatever it is. Log in with a Facebook user, log in with a Google ID, or you can log in with a Twitter account. So essentially we support the OAuth 2 flow for each of those providers. And you've hit these apps all the time, right? Where you hit an application that says, this application is asking for permission to access your blah, 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 and blah, and you say yes, and it basically then is now authorized by that authentication provider, Twitter, Google, Live, whatever it is, to have access to use them as the authentication provider. And again, authentication is the proof of who you are, not what you can actually do, right? So I believe you because we believe that Facebook, I don't know if I believe Facebook, but sorry, political rant. But we believe that Windows Live, Google, Twitter, and potentially Facebook are trustworthy authentication sources, okay? God, I'm going to be in so much trouble with this. can't believe I'm saying the things I'm saying. All right. Anyway, we support that. I'm going to show you the Microsoft account provider right now. Okay. We're going to do that. And so if you look at this, and I don't actually call this authenticate method, which I'm going to leave out of here. Essentially, again, this is a little lesson in Windows 8 programming, but the on navigated to is essentially the page load, right? It's the first thing that runs essentially when you're navigated to. I'm going to not call this authenticate method. Now I've locked it down. Let's go ahead and run it. Now Facebook. A little bit, yeah. Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. Okay, and now it looks like it's working, but then all of a sudden, bang, we're going to hit an exception. Okay? And the exception is unauthorized, right? So basically the mobile service did its job, and when I tried to call the read in order to get the list of existing to-do items, it basically said, no, you didn't present the key. The user in that object didn't come across. Real quickly to make that point, if I go to the read script, this user object is the known user. So when I'm authenticated, it will pass back the information about the authenticated user, the Facebook credentials, the live credentials, whatever it is, and a Boolean that basically says is authenticated, like it's gone through the OAuth flow and it basically has a token. Yeah?
How would this relate to, like on the Webish side, there's like the IDVI principle in terms of the wire up. Is there anything with like an ASP.NET Flow on this, or this is completely separate in terms of authentication?
So you're talking about the old provider model stuff?
Yep. In other words, how does this kind of fit in, or how is this
So
distinct?
Microsoft, yeah, in the past we had the claims authentication provider and the authorization provider and the various provider models that we had with the ASP.NET flows and things like that in the past. The more recent authentication model is claims-based authentication. Primarily wrapped up with what we call WIF, the Windows Identity Foundation stuff, and basically what you do is you present a series of claims. So the authentication happens in what we call the access control, the service, ACS, and then it gets buttered up potentially by interstitials that basically say, okay, now that I know you are Adam Hoffman, you are a manager and you live in Chicago, and these additional claims get sort of added onto that, and then anybody downstream can look at that and basically say, what are the claims? So there's authentication, which is the you are Adam Hoffman, and then there's the claims that get batted onto that for authorization that get used down the flow. This is the later model of that. So the correlation between the old provider model and the claims-based stuff is there is no correlation. They both provide a method to do authentication and authorization, auth-N and auth-Z, we call that. But there's not one that is equal to the other. Now, what's also interesting in this, if you've played with Azure at all, you know that there's another service in Azure called ACS, Authentication Control Service, which essentially is a wrapper on other authentication providers, including Twitter and whatever it is. It turns out they didn't use the same one. So Azure Mobile Services uses a different ACS than the Azure provided ACS that's actually another part of the system right now. That will be correlated at some point, I'm sure.
For strategy, if you're doing Webish things with in some cases old and new, and with all this going on,
right.
is there some way to wrap it to protect yourself so you can do all that behind the scenes and adjust and keep it out of your code space? Or what's the best strategy for that?
So I guess I'd have to know a little more how you're using what sort of controls you have in place right now. What I would suggest is probably you're going to end up putting the authentication in here, and you're still going to do your authorization using the older claims model. Typically what you have in the system you're describing is you have a database that has username and some hash password. And you just basically go through a flow that says, here's the username, here's the password they said, I'm going to forward hash it, compare it to the hash that was in the database, and if they match, then that must be the right person, right? This essentially replaces that, because what you're doing is you're outsourcing that work to Live or Facebook or whatever in order to make the claim that I am really who I claim to be by putting in my Twitter password or my Facebook password. But after that, the process of authorization then goes to typically a different set of tables that says, okay, Adam Hoffman now has these other, I call them claims now, but before it was these other attributes, right? He's a manager, he's a whatever it is. You could still very easily keep that, if you have a whole bunch of SQL tables that have all that authorization sort of stuff, in this very same SQL database and handle that on the server side. So you could essentially take the authentication that comes in. I've got to get my terms very precisely, right? And use that to map to the other stuff that you had in the past and sort of blend the old with the newer strategy on that sort of thing. I would think that would be a reasonable way to sort of step into this as you make the move, right? It turns out that all of those providers I just mentioned also, almost all of them, have a claims portion as well that you can butter up the claims inside that. You can add additional claims that Facebook would manage or Twitter or whatever it is, and that could be interesting as well as a strategy to migrate to. But my suspicion is for your business flows, you already have a bunch of data tables that have a user ID and either some relationship to an attribute or the attribute itself just in a bunch of columns on the side. I just bring those forward, put them right here. This is my sort of off-the-cuff suggestion, okay? All right, so we just failed on this, and then this user object has the, that's where I left off, sorry. Was that a satisfactory answer, or are you gonna want more? Okay, okay. Did I miss something? Okay, all right, we'll come back to it. All right, so this essentially didn't happen. So let's look quickly at the authenticate method right here to see what it does. Essentially, I'm just going to tightly loop because I'm going to require them to log in while user is null, while it hasn't gotten set the user object that I have right here. I'm going to call the mobile service, log in async with a particular mobile authentication provider. And we support, oops, let me stop it. We support 4 of them: Facebook, Google, Microsoft account, Twitter, right? And so you set those up and configure them in the portal in various different ways. I'm going to leave it at Microsoft account. I'm going to show you in the portal how I did that. So to go back to here, the mobile service, to identity. On each of those different providers, there's different things that they have to have in order to let their authentication flows work. This client ID and client secret were managed with the manage.dev.live.com portal. That's essentially where we manage our apps that Live knows about, the Live authentication provider. And it gives you these 2 things, client ID and secret. Facebook has different stuff, Twitter has different stuff, and Google has different stuff. And each of those have their own management. You have to go and essentially make your application known to their authentication provider, and it hands you back these secrets, and you just tell the system about it. So these are the secrets for this particular one. All right. And it basically tries to do that authentication, and if it works, if the login async doesn't throw back an invalid op exception, basically you're logged in and the user gets saved because it was caught here. Otherwise, it just basically will say you aren't logged in. So let's go ahead and run this now. Actually, let me make sure I uncommented it. Okay. So now instead, we're going to wait the authentication. So essentially 1 little line of code plus about 10 lines of code, 15 lines of code that does the auth. Right? And this is going to spin up all sorts of goo in Windows for you. Right? It's going to put together that OAuth flow for you and connect to the service. So it's literally going to reach out to the service provider. It's going to skin that. It's going to put this in, and it's going to let me log in as something. Now, again, this only says that I'm logged in and that I'm somebody who's known to that system. This is not authorization. This is just authentication at this point. So I'll log in. So keep me signed in, sign in. And now it's basically doing all the stuff you would expect. Do you want this app to have access to your data? And based on the default claims, I actually asked for name, gender, display picture, contact, and friends. You can ask for a lot more than that. You can ask for a lot less. That's the default. But I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And once this is done, I'm now logged in. That is the unique ID within Microsoft. So that gobbledygook right there is the Microsoft account GUID. That is what you'd want to store in your authorization table at this point, because every time you log in with those credentials, that will be presented as the user.id field. Okay? And that's available in that user object in the portal flow as well. So in the JavaScript running on the server, user.id, or I think it's user.userid, actually camel-cased, is that. And then you can use that anywhere you want. Okay? Sure, just like, unless you were, right, in your old days you would have stored permissions based on a username, something like that, sure. Yeah, you need some way in order to figure that out, yep. Yep, that is correct. You'll need, or you could build a separate application that would essentially do the login to spit that out, right? Your admin tool could essentially have that, or you could basically, write an application that would do that and then would send you that gobbledygook in some other flow, and then you could use that some other way, right? But anyway, now I've logged in. I should be able to, do all the things you'd expect I'm able to do. And so it's running the CRUD level support on that and making sure the authentication is done. Only authenticated users can do that, right? Okay. All right. Moving on. Let's quickly take you to number 3 here and show you the differences between this. Now, the other thing that Windows 8, if anybody here running Windows 8? Good. Good. Okay, at least 3 people in the room raise their hands. All right, Windows 8 has a notifications architecture, much like iPhone does and the Windows Phone does. Basically, you can pop up, even when your app's not alive, the operating system knows about it, and you can basically reach out and touch that person, and the application can put a notification in their face where you can then click on it and deep link back into the application, right? It's a notification system. Pretty cool. There's a bunch of different notifications types, toast, tile, raw, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go ahead and open that and take a look at how that works, because we also wrap that nicely for you. So let's go to step 3. Open up this one, and I'll walk you through the differences between that and the other. Now, in the meantime, let's go to the portal and look at Master Mobile Service 3, and look at the Push tab. Once again, client secret. Package SID is essentially this security identifier that a Windows 8 package has. When you create and package and push to the store, there's this crazy gobbledygook, MS-app, a whole bunch of other stuff, that is the unique package security identifier that gets bundled into your app manifest, and that's the way basically the store knows once it's put in that your app is the one making these requests, and it can secure and shut you down if you're doing naughty things later on. So that goes on there. I should probably show you in the Windows Store. So nobody here has actually built a Windows Store app yet, but if you do, you'll go to dev.windows.com in this dashboard, and you will have these Master Mobile Service, these apps basically along the way. I'll show you the various things you have to set up to get an app in the store. I reserved the app name, and in the advanced features, went and hooked up push notifications and live services. And then I did this identifying the app thing here, authenticating my service. So that's where I got the client secret and the SID out of the app, and this is basically how the store now knows what the app's manifest should say and vice versa. So that's where I got it. Okay. Going back, let's go back to here. Very, very similar to what it was before, except you'll notice that I have this, added this. So I have, let me turn that up just a little bit. I have this push notification channel object, current channel, which is essentially the channel of the application on that machine. It is essentially a unique, again, very long identifier that is essentially the way the Windows push notification service knows how to reach out to your machine and tap it on the shoulder when an app talks to the Windows notification service in order to do that. And so let me show you a diagram because it'll make a little more sense. Going back to here. Yeah, let's do that. All right. Oh, sorry. The server-side logic, real quickly, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do in the server-side logic. This is very well documented at this point, but you can do raw queries. You can do a lot of stuff in the JavaScript side. You can get access to the request. You can write to a virtual console, which is logging on the server side to figure out what's going on. Push notifications, tables, status codes. Oh, I do want to very quickly show you this slide. So you may say, hey, how did you make the decisions in the schema about that? When you automatically created the schema bits, this is what it does out of the box. You can go and create the tables or the columns explicitly yourself if you want to have more fine-grained control, but this is what it does. Any kind of number it sees, it makes a float 53, the most precise kind of float. Okay? You may not love that, but it can't go wrong there. It can store any kind of number there, right? Booleans are bits, date times are datetime offset 3, and strings are varchar max. If you want to do it differently, feel free to go back into the schema and undo what it's done. But out of the box, for the typical guy, this is going to work pretty well for them, right? That's what it does. All right, authentication. Sorry, I was trying to get to this one. All right, so the push notification lifecycle overview, just to give you an idea. On my Windows 8 box, there's essentially 2 things that are happening. The app lives, and the notification client platform is sitting right there, which is essentially the SDK that talks to the Windows push notification service. When my app wants to do something, it asks itself, what is my channel URI? What is my unique ID? Right? When somebody wants to talk to me, like I want to talk to myself or I want a different app to talk to me, what is mine? So it's going to call the notification client platform and get back that gobbledygook. It's just going to call out to mobile services and register that information. So the mobile service that we put up is also sitting there waiting for these notification services. That mobile service will then act as a proxy to talk to the Windows push notification service, which is a whole bunch of servers on a whole bunch of different data centers which are set up to reliably manage the push notifications feature of Windows 8. And then they will reach back out, now that they know it, into your machine and cause that notification to happen. That's how that flow happens. And that's how mobile services hides in the middle of this. Okay? All right. Let's go ahead and go back to the app. Yes?
What does that give us? I'm trying to understand. What does this push notification give us? I'm just
Sure.
asking to.
Yeah. No, it's fine. So, in Windows 8, and if you haven't really used Windows 8, you won't have seen this a bunch. But there's this ability essentially to have your app wake up and notify the user and sort of tickle the user to do something, even when the app's not running. So, what happens is at the operating system level, you can, from a server, if you know that unique ID of the application itself, the server itself can reach out and say, hey, it's 6 o'clock. There's an alarm going off. This application would like you to do something at 6 o'clock. Or, hey, your friend just made a move in this game. You're doing a turn-based game kind of scenario, right? Your friend just made his move. You should get back in the game and do it. And literally by clicking on the notification, you can then wake up that application, even if it's not running. It doesn't have to be sitting there polling and everything else. There's essentially this server in the cloud which is waiting to sort of wake up your machine and get your app back in front of that user. That's what the push notifications do. Yes?
So is this a guaranteed delivery, or is
It is not.
Yeah. So is there normally time on this, like that you can schedule in terms of how long the push notification works? Or is it
You're saying in
pushes
scenarios where the machine's turned off, right?
Yep.
Or they're right for whatever reason. The answer is it's not guaranteed. I've tried repeatedly to get somebody to tell me the number of if the machine comes on within X minutes, it will likely get there. The answer is it's just not guaranteed. They won't tell you that number. I suspect, again, not speaking for anybody who knows anything, because I don't, I suspect the reason is that they need to have the ability to change the amount of retry based on just how many messages are floating out in the universe at any given point in time. It would be nice to be able to get to a point where if the person comes online within 10 minutes, then it's guaranteed, but they've made no such guarantees at this point.
So basically, soon means probably, long means not likely.
Yeah, I think that's sure.
But in any case, it just means that as long as you're on or you're going to be on within a certain reasonable time frame.
And connected to the internet.
It's just not guaranteed unless you put in store forward mechanisms separately.
That's right. If you need it to be guaranteed, you're going to need to have a background polling operation when the app comes up to look for queued stuff. That you're going to have some other methodology to do it. This is designed essentially to allow you to create apps that are more sticky to the user, that don't get used for a couple of days and then forgotten, right? Or just app scenarios where essentially there could be a long period of time between something happening and everything. You want to tickle that user to make his move in chess because the other guy's finally made his move or whatever. This is what that's designed for.
Is there any type of polling mechanism where you can check if it got to them or not, or you just don't know?
Again, it's non-guaranteed.
Okay.
Again, it's non-guaranteed at this point. Although I hear that request all the time, right? Because you at the server side would like to know if did it make it? Actually there is. On the server side, it does throw an error that you could in theory catch. It'd be hard to do in mobile services, I think, because it actually tends to run and then you don't have a thread that's pulled. It runs and then it's gone, right? You can't hold the thing open for forever. But you could write a server-side application that would do sort of, schedule delivery, try to send it as fast as possible. If it failed, put it in your own sort of retry queue, and then exponentially back off is typically what you'd want to do. If you fail, you don't want to typically do it immediately. You want to wait a second, and then you want to wait 2 seconds, and 4 seconds, and 8 seconds, or whatever it is, because you're just beating your head against a wall at some point. But yeah, you could imagine a scenario with that. And it does report back the success of you calling into the mobile service. Or you can also call, by the way, the Windows notification service directly. You don't have to go through mobile services. It's just...
Once they connect, then you could retry.
That's right, sure. If you had some kind of pulse where they came online and now yeah, that'd be a great way to do it, sure. Yep.
One last question.
Yeah.
In Windows 8 development, is mobile always required for push notifications in Win8? Or is that just in this scenario? Can you go back a slide, I guess, if you can?
Sure. You want the slides, you want this.
Yeah, back. So your mobile services on the top right,
Correct.
Is that always required? if I
No.
want-
So
that's
that
just in
was
this
the point I was
scenario?
making. You can actually you can write other code that actually talks to the Windows push notification service. That's kind of what I was sort of saying there. You could write a server-side process that would do something a little more sophisticated than this, if you wanted, right? Absolutely. Yeah, it's just mobile services is here, and it makes it easy to for the average app developer to sort of hit that quickly. Either on the client side, because it grabs the notification handle, which I'm about to show you, or on the server side, you can actually just call directly into the push notification service because it's all supported in the JavaScript object that's sitting there as well. So yeah, but it's absolutely not required. That's right. The Windows notification service existed long before mobile services did. So. All right, so sorry, getting back to the code, I'm going to try to make a little more haste here. So it's going to have this acquire the current channel. All that's going to do basically is call the notification channel manager and create the channel for application async. That basically says, give me my gobbledygook, give me my name, give me my code that if notification services wants to reach out, it gets it. So I changed that. I also, this is really silly, put in my main page here in the CLR class of my to-do item, I just added that channel. I have a channel. So I'm basically, when I put an item in, I'm basically going to show my channel with it. This is a terrible schema design. Don't do this, okay? Don't put all that stuff in every to-do item, have it somewhere else. I'm just doing it for the purposes of very quickly having access in the database to that long gobbledygook so we can do a notification back to ourselves. And all we're going to do is we're going to insert it, and then on the server side, we're going to have a little bit of code that says, okay, we inserted the thing, now let's reach out with that ID that just came through in the JSON for the channel and call the Windows push notification service and re-notify me back. So if I go here, and I now look at the data here for to-do item, go in, to-do item, and the script, you'll look at something a little bit more interesting in my insert script. So let's stare at this for a second. Right? I'm basically going to, normally this is said request.execute. That's it. By default, request.execute parses the JSON, does dynamic schema if it needs to, shoves it into the database, and then returns a 200. That's all it does. Right? I'm going to call request execute, and I'm going to basically create a success function. On success, when that's done, I want to respond back to the client because I don't want to hold the thread open. He doesn't need to wait for this other junk. And that's going to send back the 200. Then I'm going to call this push.wns, Windows Notification Service, sendToastText04, the cleverly named sendToastText04. And I'm going to take that item.channel, which is the URL, the gobbledygook. That's the channel I'm going to send it to, and I'm going to basically take the text one and just pull the item text, which was basically the to-do item. I'm going to send that back to it. And on success, I'm going to log that. That's all I'm going to do, right? Silly, simple. But what it's showing you essentially is that on the server side, you can communicate with the WNS, and you can sort of do that. So let's go ahead and run this app. Put a break, I guess, here, just so we know the insert happened. We'll see it. Okay. And by the way, I pulled the authentication back out of this one. This one's not authenticated, so I wanted to have one thing at a time. Save that. Okay, my to-do item comes in. Come on, you. So that's what it looks like. And I could try to zoom that, but it'll probably go away. Yeah, it did. It's kind of in very light gray, but that's what that long string of gobbledygook looks like. Let's see here. That's what channel looks like. And it is. It's just a long bit of craziness that doesn't mean anything. But that's how you get back to my machine right now, right here, logged in. Right? And then now the Windows notification service with that can figure out how to parse, go through this, find me, and tap me on the shoulder. Okay? So we're going to let that insert. Server-side logic will run. And there's my notification. Right? And so you can imagine now very quickly that if every user of your app basically took that and put it into one table and not a million times, if, hey, every user of your app can sort of register that into a channel table. You can then parse that out if you want everybody to see everything, the notification. Every time I insert something, everybody should see it, right? Or you want to parse it out into every different authorization like families or groups or clusters. On the server side, you can basically parse and read that data and then call out to WNS and sort of send out these notifications in bulk, right? Kind of cool. So now you can see very easily, you know, a couple of lines of code, how you can essentially wrap yourself into that process and reach out and tap somebody on the shoulder as well. Okay. All right, so I'm done with the Windows demos. Very quickly, try one more thing just to show you that we really do. We're spreading the love in every direction now. So let's see if I can make this work. Let's just open. I'm going to go back to IE, though, because it only seems right for this. So I'm going to try to dial into a Mac Mini. And I'm not admitting that I own a Mac Mini. I do. I do. I took the Bing challenge, and it won. Did you?
Did I take?
Yeah, did you take it? Bing it on.
No,
It actually, I think it does have more successful results in general for me. But maybe that's just how I search. All right. All right. Now the MiFi is really just going to be straining in every direction. Let's see if we can do this. All right. Somewhere in my basement. Okay. All right, Safari. That's what the kids use here, right? So let's go to, oh, can I change the size of that to be more pleasant? So we can actually read it without losing our minds. What do you suppose the resolution on this is? 1280? It's a little better, right? Is that good? Good enough? Okay. All right. Where do I want to go? Manage. WindowsAzure.com. We'll go back to the original one I created for you guys just to prove it's not sleight of hand. SVNUG, iOS. Create a new iOS app. All right, I already have the table created because it's the original one. I'm going to download it. Boink. Okay. It's so bouncy. Oh, open and find. No, let's do that. Okay. Get Xcode happy here. You can tell I don't work on a Mac normally. Like, it took me forever to figure out how to open anything. All right, so here's the Quick Start app. Open that up. I believe the list controller is essentially the code that hooks up to it. I'm just going to go ahead and run this for the purpose of time. And hopefully the emulator starts up. There we go. And there it is, and read some data. Come on, one time. Maybe there wasn't any data in here. Oh, it's adding it. Okay, so there it is running in iOS. And if I go now that I've created those, back to here, run that. I should do this with the notification one, actually. That'd be kind of cooler, that I could notify me in the other window. I wonder if it would come over top of the go to my PC thing. Should. All right, this one. And hopefully when this comes up, it will have read test and test 2 from my, there we go. So I'm, right, kind of cool. There's an Android version, there's a, whatever. So you can basically put up one backend that supports, a heterogeneous group of clients if you want to do app development with those other guys. And I could see why you would. so pretty cool, right? Any questions? Sure.
It's a Node.js backend, right?
Yep.
How much control can you download the Node.js app and say, I don't know, say you're wanting to do every time you auth a user, you're wanting to write out a log or something. Do you have that much control, or is it pretty limited?
You get control right now of the CRUD operations per table. That's what you're allowed to do.
So that's it. Pretty much you have to go off the insert, delete, whatever.
That's correct.
Okay.
That is currently where it stands. Now, I have to be careful what I say. They will continue to add more control on the server side. But as it stands right now, you have CRUD level control with a variety of granularities of that CRUD level control on each of the tables you have. And you can have obviously different controls on different, of the CRUDs per table, but you can't get involved in the auth flow. No.
And if you're writing, say, the JavaScript on your machine, because you showed us in how to do it through the console.
Yep.
How do you upload that?
There are PowerShell scripts that can manage this entire thing, can provision it, can change the script per table, per whatever, can provision the tables indirectly through here, although I'm not sure why you'd do that rather than just provision them directly on the database. But yeah, there's a whole series of PowerShell management scripts that Azure ships with. So one of the big drivers for rewriting the portal to be an HTML5 thing was so that you could do demos on Macs and we could actually bring in a lot of other, other operating systems rather than Silverlight. And in doing that, they've done a really, really good job of everything you can sort of do by clicking on a button and typing something in the portal. You can do by calling a RESTful endpoint with a key. And then we have PowerShell scripts and documentation that wraps all of that.
Is it all hooked into like the other stuff, like GitHub, for example?
The PowerShell scripts themselves?
Well, like I know a lot of the deployment you can do through, say, GitHub. And a lot of times when you create say, Azure website, you can...
You can. So Windows Azure Websites is actually integrated with GitHub and our product, PFS. Yeah, I should remember that more quickly. God, I'm going to be in such trouble. But this doesn't do that. You can't simultaneously...
You can't do that, okay.
You can't get currently I guess what you'd be looking at this point is the Node.js server-side code for the insert, update, delete, whatever it is, so you can basically source control that, right?
Right.
No, you do that separately, and you basically just script
You just
squirt
have
them
to
into
push
place.
it directly
Yeah.
through PowerShell.
That's
Okay.
right. That's right. That's right now. Yeah.
I just had a few questions.
Sure. And he has a list he's been rating the whole
Just
time.
just
a
few.
couple three
Well,
questions.
and the first one, I think I know the answer to it, but I saw this quick setup, and I was curious, why not use just, and I know Azure has its kind of NoSQL-like concepts, why SQL Server, why not just some sort of NoSQL storage with JSON? And I know you mentioned it was OData, is it the search? So that's first question.
Well, so the first question is why SQL versus no data, right? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. OData.
Why not like some sort of NoSQL
Okay.
solution? Yeah.
Yep.
And then the other question would be the JS on the inserts. Why JavaScript on the server side? Why not?
Yeah. So
like
these are all product team decisions that I couldn't answer to, in all honesty. I will say this, the Node.js stuff is becoming more and more popular. I will be the first one to tell you, when I first heard that people were writing JavaScript on the server, I was like, what? Why would you do that? That was my initial gut response to it. As it turns out, Microsoft, language equals VB or language equals JScript, right? Way back in the day. I mean, since the ASP days, we've been allowing JavaScript on the server side, right? So the Node.js thing, while it seems new, actually has a pretty long history, right? I think that the push towards Node.js really comes from the fact that there are more and more developers coming into the world who have HTML5 and JavaScript coding skills, but haven't necessarily seen other languages at this point. And Microsoft is really, I think, trying to follow along, and I don't think it's just us, but there are a lot of people putting a lot of thought and effort into JavaScript as a full-featured, rich development environment. And it's probably, arguably, one of the best-known languages in the world today, whether you like it or not. And by the way, I made this point to a couple people earlier. I did a talk 2 weeks ago on how to use TypeScript to avoid having to use JavaScript. So I get it. Like, I totally understand why JavaScript doesn't seem like that sort of an industrial thing. It seems like a scripting language as opposed to a full-feature thing. But I think with the work that they're doing with ECMA 6 and everything else and the module level stuff and the inheritance, and they're really trying to drive the language forward. I think it'll continue to be a more full-featured language. And my suspicion is that we're just trying to be ahead of that. I think it's also true that we clearly saw that JavaScript was a real environment. And there's another evangelist named Clark Sell who's like, he can't believe that I wouldn't go to JavaScript. Like, he's my buddy, he's a good guy, and I argue with him all the time about JavaScript versus C#. But I think that, Microsoft made it pretty clear with Windows 8 that HTML5 and JS is a full-featured app development strategy. We have given as much, if not more, support to the tools and tooling around allowing people to write full-featured, really actual natively built apps. They're just basically a hosted HTML5 JS and a browser control like you get with the PhoneGap or some of these other solutions that allow people to do it. They really are natively compiled down. They do that. Now, I made this point earlier, and I don't want to talk about this. It's a little off context here. If you are doing HTML5/JavaScript Windows 8 development, and you have a bunch of existing code that is in C#, you should be careful about reusing that code for performance-critical applications at this point. There is apparently, and I'm going to give you a botched version of my technical understanding of it, but there's 2 different garbage collects that are at play, and there can be some sort of interop chatter that happens when that goes on. So I'll just say that if you're going down that route and you're building Windows 8 apps, the current guidance is try to be HTML5 JS the whole stack if you can, or try to be C# SAML the whole stack, and don't sort of cross those unless you don't really the performance isn't absolutely critical in those spots where you cross that boundary. So
I mean, I was just curious if they were putting the JS on the server because they were anticipating that you might write some JavaScript code that then you'd want to reuse on the client, like say validation, to do quick validation on the client, and then have the same library run on the server. I mean, that's more why I was asking.
So when I go to the Node.js user group in Chicago, which I do from time to time, that is one of the great arguments that they make in terms of code reuse. And why would you want to write JavaScript in the server? In fact, that's sort of the test case for why you want to write JavaScript on the server. Well, you have to have your validation logic in both places because God knows it can slip by and you'll miss it in some UI somewhere and whatever it is, right? Wouldn't you want the same code to be able to be in both places? And I think that's a very fair argument. Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak to the motivation of us doing it, if that was one of the compelling reasons, but I certainly hear that just talked about generally as an argument for Node.js. Yeah, and then your other question was about the no data versus SQL stuff. I don't know. I don't know why they chose one versus the other. I know that there's a comfort, I think, to a lot of developers to be able to sit in SQL Server Management Studio and sort of plug in directly to the database like I showed you and see what's going on under the covers, right? Right, I mean, that certainly, when I first figured it out, it made me feel a little bit better.
Okay, I'm just going to push back on a little bit because to talk like you did about JavaScript and talk to me about comfort, those two, because it seems, if you wanted to comfort me, you would have put it in C#. I don't know.
Well, again, I can't speak to the motivation of the product group. I don't know. I'm just giving you my comfort thing here. What makes me sleep better at night, I guess. I don't know. That's fair.
I was more comfortable with C# there and dealing with something else.
Yeah, I think it's probably inarguable that more people know JavaScript than know C#. I have no way to back up that statement, but except it's got to be true, right? I mean, it just has to be true. If it's not true, I can't believe it's not true. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, cool. I'd like to really quickly, and you don't have to record this necessarily, make a pitch for a Midwestern conference. Anybody here heard of that conference? It's literally called That Conference. Okay. Last year in the Dells at a water park, we had 3 days in August for $350, plus you got to pay for your hotel, but $350 for a 3-day We Feed You conference, not bad. A lot of technical speakers. We had Scott Hanselman did a keynote up there. Leanne Gersing did a keynote up there. A lot of really smart people came out and talked. And then me, I talked too. And then we're going to do it again. If anybody's interested in potentially doing that, it's essentially our summer camp for geeks thing. I would encourage every one of you to consider the possibility of speaking there. It is an awesome conference. We have put out the call for speakers. It's open as of April 1st, and it closes April 15th. It is not a Microsoft-centric conference. It is designed to be agnostic. There's a cloud track, there's a mobile track, there's a web track, and then there's an other track. There's a sort of like soft sciences, like what makes you get up in the morning. We will accept basically any talk that anyone wants to do on anything. We're actively looking for people who want to talk about .NET stuff or Microsoft-related stuff, but we're also very actively looking for people who want to talk about non-Microsoft-related stuff, whether that's sort of soft science kind of stuff, or iOS or Android and things like that. We're trying to make it basically a really killer conference for the Midwest so that you don't have to spend $2,000 and go off to the coast in order to do it. In the meantime, we did it in a water park very intentionally so that you can bring your family and your kids and they can hang out in the water park and have a good time while you're doing your geeking out during the day, and then you can go and hang out with them at night. So we're going to do that again this year in August. I think it's 12th through the 14th. I have cards on that if anybody would be interested in taking that. But also, I really want to encourage people here to talk. Like, pick a subject that you're actually interested in. We had about 700 people there last year, and indications from, what we think the sort of interest level based on the number of visitors to the site and the sponsorship and that sort of stuff that we're getting. We're going to guess that we're going to get 1,000 to 1,100 this year is our prediction. So a lot of people. We'll be doing at any given point in time probably 8 to 12 sessions. So you could potentially be talking to 20 people. You could be potentially talking to 200 people, depending on how interesting your talk is. So I encourage people who've never done this sort of thing, do it. It's a great opportunity to network in the Midwest. There's a ton of super smart developers around here. And we aren't the coasts, but there's really smart people here as well. So I'd love to see any of you guys up there, and if anybody wants to talk about that, please, by all means, stop by and get one of these. And then I have a series of cards. If anybody's interested in other talks I'm doing or other Microsoft-related events that might be in the sort of Illinois, Springfield / St. Louis area, if you give me, if you want to fill out one of these cards, I will add you to a very discreet mailing list. We will not spam you, essentially. I will send you individual emails from time to time, and you might get 1 or 2 things for a downtown Chicago event from my marketing group, but that's it. We won't beat the heck out of you, and you can opt out of it at any time. So, but totally optional on your part. So, all right. Thank you.